to BB's Handmade Dress. Today I've decided to give you a top 10 of my favourite sewing gadgets. Some of them are for beginner type things, other things are very specific jobs if you like, but they're kind of the things that I reach for first, and they're the things that I use all the time when I'm sewing. So let's get started. I'll start off with the ones that are most useful for beginners, and then move through, so they're not kind of my top 10 from 10 the most sort of rubbish to number 1 being the best. They all do very different jobs. It'll be the beginners things towards the beginning, and then getting more complicated tools towards the end. So first things first. This is one of those ones that I use so super often that it's not true. You see them a lot on Instagram. In fact, I think mine were made by Sunny. I can't think what her blog name is. I will put it in the comments. She was a blogger and she had a shop, and then she's kind of disappeared off the face of the earth, which makes me sad because she really inspired me towards the beginning. In fact, she made 2 of these things for me that I ordered from her Etsy shop. So if you're watching, Sunny, thank you very much. I use them daily and have done for a very long time. So the first one, number 1. This is one of my pattern weights. So I have a selection of them. I have these big ones that are quite heavy. I've got medium ones which are a little bit heavy, and then I've got mini ones. Just having a look around now to see if I've got a mini one that I could show you. Aha! So I have big ones, mini ones, and middle-sized ones. So that's my mini ones. All these are metal washers. Okay, so what Sunny's done is she wrapped them in fabric, and they look really, really cute, and I use them most of the time when I'm cutting out. Pretty much. Oh, look at that, that's pretty. I've got a little flower in between there. Yeah, I use these all the time. They are brilliant. The heavier ones are great even with denim, trying to hold denim onto the table when you've got a lot of it. These are brilliant for that. You can use anything really basic like tins of things, tins of beans, tins of tuna, which I have been known to do in the past. But these washers are dead cheap, and just a bit of fabric glue and some bias binding, and you could totally make these. They're really gorgeous. However, I've seen some really, really cute ones recently that are kind of like little cakes. I will link to those in a moment because I can't think of the name of the person that makes them. But everyone's going mad in the blogosphere for those. Of my 10 is going to be pattern weights are the most used, I would think, and probably the most useful to a beginner when you're cutting out your patterns. Having a weight there really makes a difference between kind of cutting really well and maybe not cutting quite so well. So going on with the useful things for beginners, I use this all the time when I'm teaching people from the start. I always have a seam guide on my machine. So I've got a little Husky machine that has a metal needle plate, and my Janome doesn't. So I tend to teach on my Husqvarna when I'm teaching people to sew, and I almost always use one of these. It's magnetic. They're dead cheap. They're about £3, something like that. They go on the needle bed, and you can adjust them to whatever seam allowance you have. So 5/8 or 1.5, depending on where you are in the world. Or if you've got a smaller one, if you're sewing lingerie and you need 1/4 inch seams, you just adjust it to how far in you want. And what it does for beginners particularly, I think it's brilliant because it stops them from losing control perhaps and veering too far one way or the other. It gives you a really clear guide, and you can't physically push the fabric past this guide. So I really think if you're beginning and you're not quite sure on your seam allowances, it's really good to just kind of take the guesswork out, and you can't really go wrong with that. So I definitely recommend that. For the price it is about £3, and you can get them most places too, just in the Habdash area. This one is an old favourite, and in fact I told everybody that I've ever met who sews to use these. I can't remember where I heard it from. It's kind of become like the top tip all over the blogosphere, but I've been using them for nearly 10 years, so I must have heard it from a sewing friend. Anywho, they are the Frixion pens. They look like this. They come in loads of colours, so the Frixion pens are really, really good because you draw your markings in that you need, either your notches or marking out your darts, anything like that, even down to if you were top stitching a pocket. They're brilliant for that as well. Not so much on dark denim, as I discovered with my first ginger jeans, but you know, with lighter ones, definitely great idea. They come in loads of colours, if that helps. These babies disappear with heat. Now, as a disclaimer, I will say I know people who have used this on white fabric, and when it's got very, very cold, things have reappeared. So I wouldn't recommend it for really, really white fabrics, and using a really, really dark colour as well, because you might find that it reappears after time, or if you get very, very cold. So just be aware of that. It's not ideal for those sorts of fabrics, but for, I've used it on everything. I've used it on cotton, silks, jerseys, double gauzes, everything, viscose, polyester, and they are brilliant because you can actually see it. And the problem I have with chalk and things like that is that I sometimes really struggle to get the residue off, even though they say, oh, they wash out and this, that and the other. Sometimes if I really need to be able to see it, I have to go quite tough with the chalk, and then I find it's difficult to get it out. So I would totally recommend your Frixion pens. Just be aware, if you're ironing, don't forget that you've made marks in certain places, because if you steam over them, you'll lose your markings. So just be aware of that. But this is a super, super good one. You can get these everywhere. I've seen them in all the supermarkets, Smiths, you know, stationery stores. You can get them, and sometimes you can get them on deals in packs. They're sort of about £4 or £5 for a pack of 3. They might be a bit more expensive depending on if they're on offer or not, but yes, love these. They are excellent. I've also got the highlighters, but I've not tried those yet. I will report back if I think they are excellent. So we are still on the beginners. So with beginners, it's always difficult if you've got different types of seams. Some things recommend you use 5/8, but sometimes you're pressing a hem and you're not quite sure how much you need, and you might decide to do a narrower hem than 5/8, or you might decide to do a thicker one, and so you're not quite sure if it's even all the way round. This is another little beauty that is really cheap. So this is, where am I up to? Am I up to number, so this is number 4. Number 4 is this gorgeous little seam guide, Sewing Gauge. It says so there, Sewing Gauge. And this is £2, something like that, not very much at all, and I find it so useful, particularly actually with shirt making. I found it really useful for that, because it's when you need your button band to be the same width the whole way down. I've just used this, so this one's in inches. It's not metric, it is imperial, but I tend to switch to imperial most of the time, because most of the American sewing patterns work in imperial. So this is in inches, but I'm sure you could get them where they were metric too. So as you can see, it's got all of the little length that you need. So say my shirt band needed to be 2 inches all the way across, I'd just have it either side and I'd measure all the way down, and I find that so useful. The one I use a lot is the 5/8, just to double check that I've got the correct place on my sewing machine, because sometimes if I'm using a different one and the needle position's different, sometimes I need to just say, okay, well on my machine it's on where this dot is, but perhaps on somebody else's machine I might need to do a quick check. So that one's brilliant. What other ones have I used? 1/4 inch, particularly for bra making, and I know some of the quilters use this as well, with 1/4 inch seams. So that's brilliant, particularly if you're sewing something very, very fine like a bra and you need to just kind of check your seams are accurate, because with bras the accuracy is really important for getting the correct kind of fit. So that is a little gem for like £2, and it's so useful, and I find myself bringing it out all the time just to make sure something is equal from the top to the bottom, or for my seam allowances on my machine. Number 5 is going towards kind of more, not advanced, but you know, kind of more useful for finer things, if you like, and mine is my rotary cutter. Mine is an Alpha, which is a pretty standard make. I have got a little tiny one as well, which I haven't used yet, but I've bought specifically for bra making and sort of making lingerie and fine things with lace. This one's lovely, but it's a little bit too chunky for going around those tiny little corners. They are brilliant. What I would say is start off with this size. This is the 4.5. You can get blades for them, replacement blades, this, that and the other, so they're always handy to have in your sewing stash if you need it. Make sure you've got a cutting board. You don't want to be going through your table. I don't say that from experience. I haven't actually managed to do that yet, which is surprising. But we've got a is it a non-bleed? A cutting mat to go with it. My cutting mat I think was about £30. I've seen some really, really cute ones that are bright pink, and I quite fancy one of those, but mine's a boring green pool table style cutting mat. But they are brilliant, and they are so super quick if you're doing something like jersey where it tends to shift about, or fine fabrics as well, and you've got paper underneath. It'll slice through all of that and make it really, really useful and easy to cut. So particularly around those corners and those curves that sometimes scissors you have to go ka-chuk, ka-chuk. Yeah, so it's much better for those kind of awkward things. So definitely rotary cutter is on my list of my top 10. So number 6. This one kind of relates a little bit to my other sewing gauge, but I've put it separately because I think it's useful for another reason as well. So this is another sewing gauge. This is a sliding sewing gauge. So this is also used for measuring out in sort of increments, if you like. It's much more of a ruler. Kind of difficult to see in the light, but more of a ruler situation. I've got inches and centimetres. It's got a lovely sliding scale, so if I wanted an exact point I could do that. They also suggest it is a button spacer, so that is useful in between your buttonholes, making sure that if you wanted 1 inch button, then yes, of course you can say, okay, that is my 1 inch space, and space it all the way down your buttonholes. I don't tend to use it that often for that. I do use it occasionally. I've come up with a slightly better method for me recently, but you know, again, this is not expensive stuff. This is probably, I don't even think it's £4 or £5. You know, it's one of those things you can get in haberdashery. They're all the boring things that you think, I'd rather buy fabric, but these are really useful, and I think if you're starting out, really useful for kind of using 4-button spacing or just checking your measurements really quickly. The thing I use it for the most is as a point turner. I do have a loop turner as well, but it's not quite the same for collar points and these kind of things. These are brilliant. Mine's a little bit dodgy at the top because it's been so used and abused, but yes, for getting the perfect points in your collars when you're shirt making, and just pushing that corner right the way out, and making it really, really sharp and lovely. That's the main reason that I use mine, but also you can use it for quick measurements and as your button spacer. So number 7 out of my top 10 sewing gadgets. This is a recent acquisition, and one I didn't really think I needed, but I did. And I've used it so much recently that I think it is definitely deserving of being in my top 10. And they're useful for a variety of things. Again, what I like with a lot of my gadgets is they're functional, so I can use them for various different jobs, and I can have them close by and know that they're useful. So this one is my duck-billed applique scissors. These are about 14 quid, I think I paid. Mine are stainless steel. They haven't got a brand on them. I didn't go for the cheapest. I think I got them on Amazon. They're pretty sturdy, they're pretty decent, stainless steel, quite nice and sharp. You don't need to use these just for applique. So for anybody that does do any applique, you can use it for reverse applique, where you sew over the fabric and cut into the fabric. Because you've got this lovely narrow bit on the top, the sort of duck-billed shape supports it and sort of keeps the edge away from the bit that you're trying to cut through, if that makes any sense at all. I'll see if I can show you an example in a moment. But yes, I don't use them necessarily for that job, but for seams where I need to either cut the top layer of fabric or I need to notch. They are brilliant for notching. Because they've got this lovely point, it's quite easy to see where you're notching. It's quite easy to kind of get your point is there, so I will notch through, and I won't go through my stitches. Or if I need a top layer of fabric cut, this one protects and stops me from cutting the bottom layer by accident. So that's why it's really, really good. So I've used it a lot on my ginger jeans, where I've got really thick, bulky fabrics and I'm just clipping or notching. They're really good for that. They are also amazing for bra making, because you've got those tiny 1/4 inch seams, and then what you're having to do a lot of the time is trim those seams on a curve, sort of within the cups and things like that, and these are brilliant for that, and that's the main reason I bought them. And they are excellent and they do a very, very good job. So I wouldn't say that they were my beginner tool of choice, but very, very useful if you do a lot of sewing, you're going into kind of lingerie, those kinds of things, or you're doing a lot of notching, if that makes any sense at all, doing a lot of notching. But you know what I mean, when you've got thick seams and you need to open them out so that you get a nice neat curve, etc, etc. So applique scissors, duck-billed applique scissors, these are 14 quid. I paid for them and they are really, really useful, so they are definitely on my top 10. So going on to number 7, these are things that are starting to get a little bit more technical, and these are things that I've needed more so because I'm doing more advanced, trickier projects. So the first 7 were kind of things that you could use in any sewing all the time, and I find really useful, I'm forever reaching for, but these are a few things that are a little bit more specialised, but still within my top 10 favourites, because I love using them. And I'm slightly cheating with number 10, but we'll let you know in a minute. So this is a stiletto awl, and I can see that your face is going, what now? This is a stiletto awl. So traditionally you use these in pattern making for where you have your dart points. They're used for pattern making. They're really, really sharp at the ends, so that they can go through the kind of manila card and things, so that you can make those holes. I use mine for making holes in my patterns in order to transfer markings. So for example, I'm just thinking whether I've got one here that I could show you. Let's use my coin pocket from my closet case pattern. So if I needed to, and I had any notches or darts or things on it, which I happen to pick up the one that doesn't. So let's use the grain line for example. If I wanted to transfer the grain line, all I'd do is I would push it through, make myself a lovely beautiful little hole, and then I would use my Frixion pen and I would mark it straight through the hole. So that is why I use my stiletto awl most of the time for pattern marking rather than for pattern making. Prepping my patterns and making sure that I've got all of those notches. I tend to notch out. I don't know if you guys do. Let me know in the comments below. I don't know if you guys notch your notches outwards or whether you go inwards into your seam allowance, but I tend to know I take much more notice of my notches if I've got a great big triangle there to remind me. Just need to remind myself on French seams to trim it before I do the French seam. But yes, I find that much more useful, and I always found it tricky to find a useful and good way to get my pattern dots to be visible to me without me forgetting them and thinking, I'm sure I meant to put a pocket there, but I don't know where because I don't know what I've done with that pattern mark. So yeah, so that is why my stiletto awl is in my top 10. So I use it for that mainly. Again, I think it's like £3 off Amazon, dead cheap. They are really sharp though, so be careful if you've got kids and stuff around. Don't leave them lying around, because the point, I've caught myself a few times on the point of that, and they are quite sharp, so just be aware of that. But if you keep them with your scissors and things, then that'll be fine. These are things that are more specialised, as I said. So one is for pressing, the other is for pressing, but in a different kind of way. So let's find out what I mean by that. First one, this was also made by Sunny. So where I said my pattern weights were made by Sunny, bless them, my parents spent probably loads on shipping trying to get these from America, but I do really love them and I use them all the time. But the weight of them, that was just stupid. But you know, I love them and I use them all the time. And when my parents ordered these for me, they'd also ordered this. This is my lovely Tailor's ham. And I also have a sleeve roll that matches it. And I love them both dearly, but I think that the Tailor's ham is much more in my top 10 because I use it so much more often than I use my sleeve roll. So a Tailor's ham looks a bit funny. And if you don't dress make very often, you might not have seen one before if you're starting out. So all it is it's filled with sawdust or sort of sand, those sorts of things. It's quite weighty. Mine's got a lovely little hanger, which is so useful. I hang it on the back of my door when I'm not using it. One side is a cotton. So if I'm pressing at a high heat, I would use the cotton side. And then I also have a wool side in a gorgeous pink houndstooth, which I love. And this is for if I was doing woolen jackets, those sorts of things, and I was pressing and I had to be careful with my heat, I would be using the woolen side. So this is for all kinds of seams really. I've used it on jackets, I've used it on shirts, jeans particularly. It's great for those curved seams, those crotch seams that are really kind of curvy. Just lay it across here, and what that does is then that means that if you sit it across, it adheres to the curve, and so when you're pressing on top of it, your curve will adhere to the curve of the Tailor's ham, and so that means that it's pressed in the correct way. So you're not trying to press a curvy seam on a flat surface. It's brilliant. I use it all the time. A lot for my shirt making and jeans making, but you could easily use it for dresses and things. It's not exclusive to those, but I find I use it most for those kind of awkward curved seams where I need the sort of curviness of the tailor's ham to make the seam sit nicely. So that is definitely in my top 10 because I use it quite often, and mine is beautiful, and I'm really pleased that I still use it. And I bought this probably when I first started the blog, so back in 2009, 2010, so what's that, 7 or 8 years ago, and I still use it regularly, and I still use my pattern weights nearly every time I cut something out, so they were definitely decent investments. Tailor's hams, I think you can get them fairly cheaply now, maybe something like £20. If you wanted a really good one, you might pay 40 odd. I think I probably paid about £40 from Sunny for her to make the tailor's ham, and maybe 20 for her to make me a sleeve roll. But then I also had to pay shipping, which kindly my parents did for me back then, and they are very well used and very well loved. And I know my friend Claire was from Claire Sews was making them recently. I don't know if she still is, but Claire, if you can let me know, and then I can shout out that you are still making these. It's really nice to have a funky one, I have to admit. I've not seen many funky ones around, and I think that was a good buy because they are tricky to find in a funky fabric. You tend to get one that's red tartan is kind of the standard, and it's fine, you know, you use it as a tool, don't you? So it's fine, but you know, having a fun one is great. On to number 10 of my favourite sewing gadgets. This one is a new one, and in fact it's just come out of the box, so it's a bit cheating that I'm putting it into my top 10, but I know that it's going to be so useful because I've seen it somewhere else, and for what I'm doing at the moment, which is jeans making and attaching poppers and rivets and all those kind of things, I'm really pleased that I bought it, and I think that it should go in my top 10 immediately, and that is Vario pliers. I bought the beautiful blue version. There is a kind of I don't know, royal blue version, which is kind of the basics, but these babies are the love colours. In fact, I've got the packet here. So they are prim ones. They are the love colours limited edition in my, what I'd like to think of as one of my this lovely turquoise branding colour. Yeah, these are the Prim Love Vario pliers. So these will do all of those rivets, eyelets, jeans buttons, all those kinds of things. The tool that I currently have is one of those awkward plastic doodahs. Okay, just to show you what I meant about those awkward little plastic things, these come with your jeans buttons or rivets or poppers or eyelets. They're these little things. So what you need to do if you've got some of these is you put the larger part in this one and the smaller part in this one, and they sit sort of awkwardly, but they do go in. Your fabric goes in between and you push, and then you use a hammer to hammer them in, and so that the shank goes on to the button or whatever it is that you're using. The issue I have with these ones is I never hit straight enough for the buttons to go in, particularly for jeans buttons. Nearly all my jeans buttons are slightly wonky where I've hit it at an angle. And with these Vario pliers that doesn't happen because you're getting even pressure from both ends, and also it's quite solid pressure and sort of, as I said, equal. So I know that these are going to be amazing, which is why I've put them in my top 10. I know Lauren from Guthrie and Garney used them on her jeans and her Clio dungaree. Okay, you guys, I'm sorry, I'm so totally cheating, and I'm adding another one because I forgot that I was going to put my sewing gauges into one little section of one of the numbers, and I totally forgot one of the things that I use even more than my pattern weights. And that is this funny little thing. And this is super, super great. And I think I wasn't meant to have a favourite. I use this every time I sew. It is brilliant. This is my magnetic pin holder. I know, magnetic pin holder. I don't know how I forgot this one. This is the top of the top of the top. They're like a £5. They're not super attractive. They look like a bar of soap, but as you can see, they hold all my pins. And if I ever came to sew at your house, you would have to remind me to bring one, because what I do is I pick up pins and then I go. So when I'm at the machine and I'm taking pins out and then going. So I would be chucking pins all over your house, because it's so automatic now. It's part of my sewing routine. I actually have two. I have this one, and I have one that is more akin to what you put nuts and bolts in if you were in a mechanics. I don't even know where I got that one. Let me show you. It's the other one that I have. So I actually have two because they're so flipping useful. I normally have one on my cutting table, and I have one near my sewing machine. So this is my other one. I also stick my zipper foot in there as well, because if I've got it to hand and it's by the machine, it's just so much easier to just pick out my zipper foot from that little dish. So this is generally the one I use for patterns and sort of pinning to fabric, and this is the one I use at my machine. But I am so used to just picking up, dropping, and it automatically landing on a magnetic pad. So if you haven't got one of these, I would totally urge you to go and get one immediately. I prefer this design. I don't like my dish ones so much because it is so magnetic, and sometimes I forget and I put it on my ironing board and then can't get it back off again. I love this design. It's really tactile. I also drag it along the floor if I've missed some pins, or pins ended up on the floor, because pins always end up on the floor in my house. I just run it across the carpet, or in my sewing room I've got laminate, but you know, across, and it just picks up everything I need. These are super awesome, and you must get one immediately. Like I said, they're about £5, and they are such good value. So I'm sorry, that's 11 11 top sewing gadgets, but you know, I'm sticking to top 10 because it's snappy. I hope you enjoyed that video. Like I said, if you've got any other things that you totally love and you want to tell me about, any sewing gadgets that you think I've missed out or that you can't live without, let me know in the comments below. If you haven't seen any of these before and you think, oh, that's amazing, again, let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to know which ones everybody else finds really useful too. I've been sewing since I was 16. I'm now 27, so it's quite a long time. So I've picked some of these things up along the way. I haven't done a huge outlay of buying them all at once. Even if I did, you'd be looking at £100 odd. It's not super expensive if you were starting out and you wanted all the tools, but I just pick them up as I go. And like I said, the Vario pliers were sort of this week. they were delivered, and the same with the applique scissors. I've not needed those until I started doing bra making. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video. I've got loads more kind of fun things like this coming up, not just fabric hauls, even though I do love my fabric. Don't forget you can find me on Instagram at bbhandmadedress, and my blog address is bbshandmadedress.blogspot.com. So I hope you found that useful. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you again soon.